This is 14,000 of the 155th caliber shells. Ukrainian troops spend up to 5,000 of these shells a day, whilst USA produces 14,000 a month. You know what I'm talking about? Yes, they are trying to increase production to 75 by the end of next year, but there is a long time until the end of next year. And there's a similar situation in Europe. I mean, they're saying it themselves. They say we've delivered everything, all the armor, all the ammunition. We've done everything for Ukraine.
Following Russian troops' occupation last month of an industrial area in southern Avdiivka in Donetsk, Chinese commentators have published a series of articles predicting the ultimate defeat of the Ukrainian army.
Can't support Ukraine. Their chief advisor yesterday said they're likely to lose this war if they lose US support.
They say that while the Russian army suffered casualties in its initial attacks on Avdiivka, it has an advantage over the Ukrainian army in terms of numbers of soldiers and quantities of available ammunition. They say that if the Ukrainian troops retreat from Avdiivka, Russia can occupy the entire Donetsk region, and when it negotiates with the Ukrainian government, it will have the benefit of more bargaining chips.
We fucked up.
Russia's attempt to stabilize the front line was broken by the Ukrainian army's counterattack in summer and autumn of 2022 and retreated significantly in the Kharkiv region and the Kherson region. After that, the Russian army stabilized its position and won two major battles in Bakhmut and in Zaporyzhia, and now Avdiivka is expected to be the third major battle.
Bakhmut, first battle. How many are left? Three big ones. Put this on record that big ones means bigger than Bakhmut, okay? And the one after that has to be bigger than that one. Because in war, as it winds down, things only get more desperate and it becomes bloodier.
Will these victories be one of the three major battles of the Ukraine war? Bakhmut was not a very important place, but it became a strategic place. The Ukrainian army did not retreat because Zelensky ordered it.
Bakhmut is not just a stronghold that holds back the Russian army, but for the Russian army to completely pull out, more cannons and shells are needed. If so, just like the Battle of Saratoga, the fight for Bakhmut will change the trajectory of our war for independence and for freedom.
After the great counterattack of Kharkiv and Kherson, Zelensky was overwhelmed by victory and claimed that Ukraine will not lose an inch of land.
Наші українці не відступають, не здаються, не зупиняють свого спротиву.
This is a military taboo. Military is an extension of politics, but politics cannot and ought not interfere with the military. If a military goal is to be achieved, it is meaningful to fight for an inch of land, such as with reinforcements or covering retreat. But this should not be a rule. Had Ukraine abandoned Bakhmut earlier, they could have launched their counteroffensive into Zaporyzhia much earlier when morale and strength of its troops were higher. Many sources say that senior Ukrainian army officials and NATO think tanks suggested that Zelensky retreat from Bakhmut much earlier.
Anonymous American officials speaking through the New York Times and Washington Post are to be believed. The U.S. has been pushing Zelensky to withdraw from Bakhmut since at least early January. These Western officials are increasingly alarmed that the amount of Western-supplied ammunition, artillery shells, military gear, and reserves that the Kiev regime is throwing into a losing battle in and around Bakhmut is threatening their much ballyhooed spring counteroffensive in the Ukrainian south.
But it was Zelensky who refused and decided to fight for Bakhmut because the political humiliation would not allow him to give it up. Zelensky, he says, repeated the mistakes of Nazi Germany's Adolf Hitler, who forbade retreat and was finally defeated by the Soviet Union in the Battle of Stalingrad.
retreat orders. Adolf Hitler, the architect of this strategy, believed in unyielding resolve. Soldiers were commanded to hold their ground, no matter the cost. Battles like Stalingrad saw unimaginable sacrifices. But this strategy often backfired, leading to more casualties and ultimate defeat.
Avdiivka is an important city, not only because it is the gateway from the Donbas region to the city of Donetsk.
This is the real deal, unlike Bakhmut, which was built up by the media. Well, on the Ukrainian side, they basically have fire control over the city of Donetsk and surrounding areas. This is why, for the Ukrainians, it means a lot. And for the opposite reason, the Russians, they don't want that thorn. It's a little bit humiliating, I have to say, that Avdiivka has not fallen. You don't want to be the general in that battle space on the Russian side saying, you know what, sir, we have not taken this city.
But as early as 9 years ago, Avdiivka has become a frontline area during the Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
Avdiivka will be, in my opinion, and it has always been building up to be a pinnacle or the climax of an operation such as the Ukrainian offensive.
Therefore, Avdiivka is regarded as a symbol of the Ukrainian spirit of resistance to the Russian army. The Russian renewed offensive on Avdiivka has been very fierce. Sergei Sejowski, an officer of the 59th Brigade, said he never faced such a dense attack. The Russian army used rocket launchers, artillery, tanks, and infantry with an average of 500 to 600 attacks per day. But the Chinese reporter said that Ukraine made a fatal mistake in Avdiivka. In order to preserve the industrial zone in the south, the Ukrainian army gave up the eastern defense line and put all of its focus in the south. In the end, they were unable to defeat the Russians and were forced to retreat to the north of Yashmi-Movaki Street. Further, the 53rd and the 110th Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine made fatal mistakes during the battle. The 53rd Brigade, knowing that the 116th Brigade was about to rescue, still became panicked by Russian bombing and directly withdrew from the defensive position without permission of its superiors. This caused the 110th Brigade to become directly exposed at the flank of the Russian army. Then the 110th Brigade similarly retreated without fighting. Therefore, these two brigades directly ceded important industrial zones to Russia. Then, when the Eastern Command of Ukraine sent the 116th Brigade to support the 56th Brigade, the northeast Stepove defense line was also difficult to resist due to the shortage of troops and was seized by the Russian army. This collapse of the first defense line in the industrial zone means that the Russian army can obtain more and more supplies, and conversely, the Ukrainian army can bring in less ammunition into the city. If Avdiivka becomes a repeat of Bakhmut, Mr. Chen Feng believes that the final victory of the Russian army can be expected. Avdiivka is another artillery-based battle, and as long as it is supported by Russian firepower, the local armed forces of Ukraine lack the armor and advanced weapons. Ukraine has lost tens of thousands of troops between Bakhmut, Zaporyzhia, and Avdiivka, and these are mainly elite troops, and therefore their losses will be difficult to replace. After the three battles, Ukraine will not only have lost its initiative, but also faces the problem of the depletion of soldiers and ammunition. The Ukrainian army will no longer be able to really fight, opines Mr. Feng. These analyses, though hidden from the Western public's eyes,
the answer is Putin's already lost the war.
Is well known to Western officials. Hence the reason that the articles in the mainstream media out of America have become ever gloomier. Take, for instance, this recent piece from the CNN. This is the moment Russian President Vladimir Putin has been waiting for, when he doesn't really need to do much and can call it a victory. The static front lines in Ukraine are slowly hardening as the snow deepens, while in Kiev there is much talk of a disagreement between General Zaluzhny and President Zelensky.
A stalemate is how General Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, labelled the war, making international headlines while upsetting President Zelensky, who projects a far more upbeat assessment.
CNN reluctantly admits that Russia is no longer losing the war or the terrain that it has seized, and therefore it concludes that Ukraine is definitely not winning. In the US Senate, Republicans blocked a legislative package including $60 billion in aid for Ukraine advancing this past Wednesday evening, amid a standoff with the Democrats over US border and immigration policy.
In another major development tonight, Republican senators blocked a White House request for more than $100 billion in emergency aid, primarily for Ukraine and Israel.
The blame game has begun.
It's your fault!
With extensive articles outlining why the Ukrainian counteroffensive failed to deliver the long televised results it needed. US officials claiming that Kiev moved too late or listened too late. Ukrainian officials, however, marvel at their allies' expectation that they pull off complex military results without the air superiority, without which a NATO army would not even get out of bed. The front lines tell three tales. To the west, Ukraine has made what CNN described as a hard-to-sustain dive across the Dnieper River to create a bridgehead. And though Ukraine may see some luck on this front, the article says it will need a lot of it to make any difference. In the center, the front lines below Zaporyzhia remain largely unchanged, and to the east, a more troubling rhythm is forming around Avdiivka. The biggest advantage that Putin has, claims CNN, is that, and get this, the West is out of ideas.
Cool.
Article then puts forward a series of recommendations, which, in my opinion, do not coincide with the reality in any respect.
Wait for it. Here it comes. Almost there!
Arming Ukraine to the full when NATO and US officials have admitted they're out of artillery shells.
Says the US is running out of weapons it can give to Ukraine.
Or perhaps making it clear that no peace deal must be made with Putin that allows him to retain the land bridge.
The head of NATO is doing some damage control, meanwhile, after controversial remarks by his office director earlier this week.
The article then finishes with a grim warning for the West. Putin cannot win, or else the price will be paid not only by this generation, but by generations to come.